May 27th, 2533, Hospital Corpsman Chief Mike Grey, enlisted Mortician of the UNSC Navy, assigned to ONI Facility Sigma 1989, compiling a report and full biological exploration of subject X-ray Sierra 02 in the interests of better understanding their biology. Autopsy will be performed exclusively by myself in a sealed chamber. I will be making use of the heavily adapted Da Vinci Class 14 autonomous surgical intervention frame and document the process with the intention of identifying weaknesses and possible vectors of exploitation to aid in frontline battle performance. The subject is a Mactocognatus, a Sangheli, or elites as they've been named by the soldiers on the front lines. The subject is assumed to be male, although further exploration will be required to ascertain this. Saurian in appearance, and believed to be the primary ruling military class within the Covenant. This subject measures 251.46 centimeters or 8 foot 3 inches in height, with a mass of 378 pounds or 171.4 kilograms. The body is well preserved, as it was recovered only an hour after death by ONI Field Acquisitions Team Epsilon 651 and stored for transport. Subject died precisely 62 hours ago, as recorded on the helmet mission camera footage obtained from the post-battle reports of Spartan 104. Cause of death: severed arterial and nervous structures of the neck by combat knife. 104 engaged the subject in hand-to-hand combat and neutralized the threat in 2.061 seconds. Subject's combat harness has been removed and is being examined by ONI Materials Exploitation Group. Coloration and armor profile match that of an Ultra in rank. No further preparations or interference of the body have since been made. Readying scanning and exploratory tools. Beginning official autopsy of subject X-ray Sierra 02. For the record, we're dealing with xenobiology here, not just unknown biology or unusual biology, literally alien. These creatures do not reside on Earth or any other planet that we've colonized. Their evolution is entirely unknown to us. Their biology is entirely unknown. And whilst there are obviously biological systems at work here that are very similar or analogous to things we are already aware of within the realms of the micro and macrobiology, we shouldn't rule out the possibility of encountering things that are utterly foreign to our current known sciences. That being said, the outward appearance and function of the elites bears relatively close resemblance to crocodilians, lizards, and more broadly the archosomorpha clade. However, their human-like intelligence, bipedal nature, and highly evolved sociological and cultural markers suggests perhaps we should use staggered synonymous labels of human biology alongside biological markers more typical of their saurian features. Until further notice, we will operate on this basis. Let's start with an initial examination of the direct cause of death. Laceration is clean and was performed with a highly sharpened blade. The flesh within bears a very noticeable purple hue, and the blood itself appears to be purple. Gathering sample for analysis, microcell autohematology analyzer can get to work on that while I continue this investigation. Initial blade penetration took place 4 centimeters to the left of the cervical spine, approximately at the halfway mark, at an entry angle of 32.6 degrees. Bringing live narrowband CT scanner online. Centering on the injury site. Scanning now. laceration penetrates 14.3 centimeters into the neck. These have more vertebrae than humans. There's very clear evidence of 9 vertebrae that will label C1 through 9. The centrum, or main body of each vertebrae, is a parallelogram shaped, with the front surface typically positioned higher than the rear surface. C7, 8 and 9 show transverse processes or rib facets that extend outwards to a greater extent than in most earth reptiles. The rib facets are slanted, connected to 3 sets of cervical ribs that are long, thin and dichocephalous or two-headed. Switching imaging spectrum. Yeah, it looks like the blade severed 2 of the posterior neck muscles entirely and severely damaged a third. It struck a glancing blow and chipped the cervical vertebrae C6 as it entered between C5 and C6 and cut the spinal cord before being dragged laterally, severing more muscular structures of the neck and the arteries and major veins in the area. From the scans, I can confirm the arterial and venous structures traversing the neck mimic form and function of the internal and external carotid arteries and 3 sets of jugular veins, not unlike human physiology. The left external and internal carotid, the superficial cervical and internal and external jugulars have been cut. The cut was clean from start to finish. The severed spinal cord would have immediately shut off autonomic function. Breathing would have stopped, as would the heart. Paralysis would be the least of its problems at this stage, losing consciousness between 5 and 15 seconds. Death would have followed shortly thereafter. While it may be thought that the primary cause of death would be exsanguination or loss of blood due to hemodynamic instability, the reality is that formally it would be categorized as sudden cardiac death. Not much more need be said here. Moving clear to allow full body deep scan of the subject alongside radiological bone composition analysis. We'll review the skeletal structure shortly before using the deep scans to aid in our exploratory surgeries into the thoracic and abdominal cavities. Recording paused, pending results. Recording resumed, I now have the scans. Sangheli's skeletal structure is remarkably robust. They have a significantly higher bone density than humans. Elevated levels of strontium can be found in the bone minerals, possibly contributing to the high bone density. The skull shows 14 individual bones with their associated sutures, which would permit skull growth over the early stages of life. Cavities for the inner ears, eyes and nostrils are highly evident. 10 canine-like teeth, 5 on the left and 5 on the right, line the anterior maxilla and are buffeted by a further 8 molars, 4 on the left and 4 on the right of the lateral maxilla. The maw of the subject features 4 individual mandible bones, 2 upper and 2 lower, each lined with 4 more canine-like teeth and 5 molars. The neck consists of 9 vertebrae with 3 sets of cervical ribs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 thoracic vertebrae. All 14 have ribs, the bottom 4 being floating ribs, and the remaining 10 being sternal ribs, the upper 5 of which are very wide and flat, with only very minimal gap between them, presenting something approximating a skeletal armour to the upper chest cavity. Very human-like clavicles and scapulars join the arms to the torso. Humerus, radius, and ulna are all very humanoid. Hands are tetradactyl, with 2 opposing thumbs. No evidence of digit fusion or vestigial digits left from evolution, suggesting that tetradactyl evolved for very early ancestors of the Sangheli species, or some evidence of this more recent evolution adaptation would be apparent. Lumbar shows 6 vertebrae, although L6 looks at least partially fused with the sacrum. The pelvis is rather narrow around the sacrum, and the pelvis's weight-bearing plane is rotated posteriorly, with the ilium showing quite clearly subdermally on the lower back. suggesting towards the Sanghili or their genetic ancestors once being quadrupedal, with the adoption of bipedal stance being a more recent evolutionary adaptation. Sacrum shows similar tailbone processes to humans, except they aren't entirely fused to the sacrum. That points towards an ancestral tail. Legs are digitigrade. Femur makes up approximately only 35% of overall leg length. Tibia and fibula are approximately 20% shorter than the femur. As is typical with digitigrade limb anatomy, the tarsals of the foot are very long, and the foot is a broad two-toe and heel, with again no evidence of fusion or vestigial digits. A fascinating skeletal structure indeed. I'll make a referral for further investigation of the skeleton of the subject to see if some of these characteristics are indeed the result of evolutionary adaptations or features unique to this individual. Any knowledge of their evolutionary histories will only aid in our overall understanding of the species. Okay, initiating the Da Vinci Class 14 Autonomous Surgical Intervention Frame. Uploading incision vectors. Starting with incision of the arms and legs to explore soft tissues. The epidermis is thick and leathery, with areas that stray into scales. The epidermis possesses a thick stratum corneum, in which waxes are arranged in membrane-like layers. Specific areas of the epidermis present what are, at face value, dermal scutes. Scan and sample analysis confirm the cornified part of the epidermis is strengthened by beta and alpha keratin. No evidence of hair follicles. The dermis receives full blood supply, while the epidermis does not. Subcutaneous tissues are present, but very minimally pronounced. Metabolism and mean level of physical activity may keep the subcutaneous fat levels at a minimum. Moving the skin away, we get access to the muscles. A small sample being collected for microscopy and mechanical analysis. Muscle fiber density is quite high at first glance. Blood supply is very well established. Tendons are impressively thick, and the attachment points at the bone show calcification of the immediate lower portions of the tendon. This could mean that this particular individual was fairly old for their species, or maybe that it was suffering from a condition similar to calcific tendinitis. Either that or this is typical for this species. Attachment to the muscles is much more graded and layered than I've seen in humans. This likely aids mechanically in the amount of force the muscles can produce without damaging the other soft tissues. This could feasibly in turn lead to a higher overall force output threshold for the muscle, adding to their strength. I'm seeing extremely lean muscle mass. Intramuscular fat cells are present, but overall nearly exhausted. This could point towards the elites perhaps having a more ambush predator type physicality rather than a persistent pursuit predator physicality as with humans. Although I would hasten to add this is likely unique to this individual. Before they died, they were participating in an extended siege, and in their final moments was going up against a Spartan. In all likelihood, this individual burned through their fat reserves during the hours of continuous physical activity, leaving very little left in the tank, so to speak, when confronted with Spartan 104. Not to lessen 104's execution of the individual in question, but physical exhaustion may have been a factor. Current calculations of CM index of 23 kilograms per square meter. That's nearly a third higher than the potential upper limit of humans. We won't linger here too long. Many points of exploitation that would serve a combat purpose can't really be ascertained through the mechanics of the arm, aside from ascertaining that elites are substantially stronger than humans by a large margin. Microscopy report is ready. Muscle microscopy shows the sarcomeres are approximately half the length of that of humans. This leaves room for two in the same given space. Electrostimulation of the sample shows a scalar proportional contractile speed and force. Again, this points towards immense physical strength. Elites basically have double the quantity of the contractile unit of a myocyte as found in humans. Further investigation is needed. Upon investigation of the head and neck, there are no hardened protective structures aside from the mandibles around the opening of the larynx. Manipulating the mandibles shows it is possible for the elites to close their mandibles entirely and create close to a complete seal when the tongue-like appendage below the larynx is flexed in the forward position. Tissue scanning reveals a very similar structure within this appendage as we find in human tongues. I'm seeing something approximating the genioglossus, hyoglossus, diglossus, and palatoglossus muscles. One would assume the extensive extrinsic and intrinsic muscles operating here allow the elites a very complex vocabulary. Cross-sectional analysis of the neck to expose the trachea shows an extended epiglottis and vocal cords. These creatures are capable of extensive speech, but would struggle with certain consonant sounds that would require the ability to create a seal, hold a pressure difference within the mouth. B, P, M sounds specifically. I duly note the lack of endocrine glands in the neck. Other organs must be present in the body for the sakes of metabolism, energy, and hormone regulation. We'll probably find those in the abdominal cavity. Upon looking at the head, the eyes are forward-facing, denoting a predatory origin. The pupils during life are narrow slits in shape, indicating an extra set of muscles to pull the pupil into this shape to limit the amount of light entering the eye during daylight hours. Obviously, with it currently being dead, the pupils are fully dilated. Again, this suggests towards the elite's evolutionary origins being nocturnal predators. The slit iris would aid the elites in being able to judge distances more effectively than humans, relying upon the inherent blur that would happen from the vertical slit pupil from light scattering on the retina, where the blur diminishes to a minimum due to overlapping focus between the two eyes, thereby giving the elites an intrinsic form of rangefinder. At a glance, the eyeballs seem approximately the same size as human eyes, except that they're positioned substantially further apart. The distance between the eyes of an elite is significantly larger than that of a human, again aiding in depth perception and ability to locate their targets. The socket of the eye is also wider than that of a human, despite the fact that the eye is about the same size as a human's. There's a lot of additional muscle structures in this socket, so that may allow the eye to rotate within the socket or almost slide within the socket, further than humans are capable of at least. Each human eye alone has approximately 130 degree field of vision, with the two eyes together granting nearly 180 degrees. The socket and the mobility of the eye within the socket, especially in this sliding mannerism of the elites, means they very likely have closer to 220 degrees of vision. And this means that elites' blind area is markedly smaller than that of humans, so any attack from behind must take place within a 140 degree arc from directly behind, although it's likely even smaller than that. The head has no external structures of the ear, instead just having an opening into the skull. One would assume this means elites would have trouble isolating sounds to a point of origin. Sounds that take place behind them would sound the same to the individual as if the sound happened at the same range in front of them. Actual external ears and cartilage change the way in which the sound reaches the inner ear, and that's what allows us to know whether or not a sound has happened ahead or behind us, or in what direction we should be pointing our heads. This may be able to be exploited when approaching an elite from behind, or coordinating with other forces to disorientate the elite. We should not rule out, however, whether the elite's combat harness doesn't account for this and aid the elite in some regard. As previously mentioned, the combat harness has been removed and is being examined by Xenomaterials Exploitation Group.
So they may come up with something here. 3D scans of the skull show a substantial nasal cavity. It has been mentioned by some soldiers that elites seem to be able to locate them based on smell alone, again suggesting towards the elite's true nature as predators. The cranial cavity is approximately on par with that of a human, perhaps marginally larger. The additional size of the skull being mainly due to thicker skull bones and thus more extensive protection for the brain. Extraction of the brain will be scheduled in due course. Perhaps some interesting things could be understood about their cerebral structures upon closer examination. AI attendance and analysis may be useful in this capacity to process the immense neuron density and ionic patterns therein. I think that's all we can understand from that for now. So, moving on. Initiating dissection of the thoracic and abdominal cavities. Just halting the dissection a second. Before we proceed with cutting through the sternum, I duly note the presence of a double set of pectoral muscles. They both anchor to the sternum, which itself is very pronounced on the chest. Human sternums are very flat and relatively featureless, the costal notches being only very minor surface textures where the ribs connect. The costal notches here, however, are extremely pronounced, allowing both sets of pectoral muscles to anchor to it. This must give the elite immense strength in the upper body, quite in keeping with the muscular machinery we've thus far observed in the limbs. Very interesting. Proceeding with dissection, this shouldn't take long. Upon initial inspection of the thoracic cavity, I'm struck by the presence of what appear to be two hearts. Lungs are very large, not entirely unexpected for a creature of this size. Again, we're seeing a very purple hue to the organs. Both lungs have only two lobes, again likely to allow the accommodation of the two hearts. The trachea and esophagus both enter the thoracic cavity in the expected location, with the trachea subdividing into the two lungs and the esophagus continuing down to exit the thoracic cavity through the diaphragm. A network of veins and arteries show that each heart is linked directly to the respective lung. Left heart feeds left lung, right heart feeds right. However, the veins and arteries leaving and returning to the hearts for circulation around the body branch and split to both hearts. So, taking the left, for example, deoxygenated blood returns to the left heart's right atrium, then being pumped through the right ventricle and out through the pulmonary artery. Blood dumps its CO2 and is subsequently oxygenated in the left lung, being pumped via the pulmonary vein back into the left heart's left atrium, then pumped through the left ventricle and out into the aorta. This will also have happened independently with the right. Where the systems merge, however, is in the aorta, where both the right and left aortas merge for circulation around the body, with the cave splitting to each independent heart upon re-entry to the thoracic cavity. Bizarre. It's not unheard of for creatures to have more than one heart, but generally speaking, this is reserved for cephalopods, deep-sea marine animals that use an additional heart or hearts to pump blood through gills. Sangheli are terrestrial animals with two large and well-functioning lungs. The neck length isn't sufficient to necessitate a second heart. It makes one wonder if perhaps the elite's distant ancestors were in fact marine animals, similar to Earth's cephalopods. It would explain the purple blood, the dual cardiac circulatory systems, and the multiple mandibles, but that is utterly at odds with the rest of the species' morphology. Point to note, for battle exploitation purposes, it may not be sufficient to execute with center mass body shots. While a bullet may damage or stop one heart, the second heart may be sufficient to keep the elite aware and in motion long enough to still be a significant threat. Recommend either excess distributed gunfire to the torso to take out both hearts, or Use hollow point or shredder rounds that are frangible and likely to flatten or splinter into smaller pieces to cause more substantial tissue damage. Or the application of HE rounds that detonate upon impact. For Special Forces operatives, particularly with Spartans, headshots would be a more viable means of quickly putting down an elite. Hematology analysis is complete. Perhaps that will enlighten this peculiarity. Hematology report attached for the record. We have some error readings, likely due to the alien biology.
Hematocrit 35%, hemoglobin error, red blood cell count error, mean corpuscular volume error, mean corpuscular hemoglobin error, mean corpuscular hemoglobin concentration error, platelet count 193,000 per cubic millimeter, white blood cell count 9,550 per cubic millimeter, absolute neutrophil count 48.9, lymphocytes 37.5, monocytes 5.5, eosinophils 7.4, basophils 0.7. So evidence of a very active immune system, but error readings on the oxygen carrying capabilities of the blood. Purple coloration may point towards altered blood composition. Running secondary testing to determine ionic compounds. Subject's blood is hemerythrin in composition, not hemoglobin. The compound differs in both the polypeptide chain and in the metal complex used to bind oxygen. In simple terms, Sangheili blood contains 2 iron atoms. The polypeptide chain in combination with this di-iron atom binding bridge means the blood lacks cooperative binding to oxygen, making its oxygen carrying capability roughly a quarter as efficient as hemoglobin. This may be the evolutionary purpose behind the elite's binary cardiac circulatory system. Having 2 hearts allows the blood to be pumped more rapidly at higher pressures, with higher densities than with a singular heart, all while sharing the mechanical load across 2 hearts rather than overworking just one. This may be an evolutionary adaptation to maintain sufficient blood saturation levels. A small point to note, hemerythrin has an even lower affinity for carbon monoxide and cannot bind with CO with any degree of stability. This basically translates to mean that elites cannot suffer from carbon monoxide poisoning, so in battle applications this means elites can't really be choked to death within a reasonable time frame or poisoned by carbon monoxide gases. Basically any method that cuts off the airflow, then relying upon increased levels of CO2 and lack of oxygen to kill, just won't be effective for elites within a tolerable time span. Passing over organ removal for further investigation to the secondary armature frame of the Da Vinci, while I continue to the abdominal cavity. Abdominal dermis, much the same as the rest of the body. Residual tissues indicate attachment to an extra embryonic membrane, suggesting that the Sangheili don't give birth to live young, but perhaps rather lay a clutch of eggs. Not immensely surprising given their reptilian physiology. Cutting down through the abdominal muscles and accessing the abdominal cavity. Abdominal walls are very thick, showing particularly strong core muscles. These also in turn lead to a slightly reduced volume within the abdominal cavity. Immediately greeted by the small intestine, the upper portion connects to a small stomach. On a cursory inspection, the intestinal tract is relatively short, pointing towards an ancestral predisposition to a carnivorous diet. Presence of a small pancreatic organ, seemingly a spleen hidden just behind the stomach. Manipulating these clear, I can locate a stout gallbladder and the liver, which is rotated and almost entirely covers the abdominal surface of the diaphragm. Wait, there are muscular structures here. Wow. One second. I need to get the intestines clear to ascertain what I believe I'm seeing here. In either case, a study of the stomach and intestinal contents will give us a glimpse into Sanghili diet, excising the stomach and small intestines for further assessment. Cut made above the stomach, clamping the esophagus, and another made at approximately the connection between the smaller and large intestines, again clamping. I'll pass these off for computational assessment of biomaterials. Now that's all clear, let's get a better look at this liver. Yeah, there's a small bundle of muscles here that anchor to the underside of the liver and traverse the abdominal cavity, finally anchoring to the pubic bone. These things have two different methods of breathing. They have a diaphragm, allowing very mammalian breathing, but they also have hepatic piston breathing. These muscles can be flexed and they pull the liver down to create a negative pressure that expands the thoracic cavity volume, seemingly much more than the diaphragm would be able to. This must benefit them tremendously in their endurance and ability to fill their pulmonary volume to capacity. In all likelihood, the elites can voluntarily activate this muscle and thereby enhance their breathing efficiency. This may explain why some elites have been observed on the battlefield looking seemingly out of breath, or at least breathing very heavily, yet no associated fatigue be present at the same time. Perhaps they're not actually tired or out of breath. Perhaps they're purposefully hyperventilating to keep their oxygen saturation levels high and maybe even increase their lactic acid recovery time. More detailed investigations of living specimens would be needed to ascertain this for certain. Nevertheless, fascinating. Moving on, we have 2 kidneys. Large intestine is, again, proportionally short. Leads to the colon and the bladder. No external urethra, indicating that elites pass both waste and water through the same orifice, not unlike birds or reptiles of Earth. We have 2 testes located just below the kidneys. Phallus is internal and hidden beneath an anterior ventral cloacal septum. Again, very crocodilian. Short of using aerosolized mutagens to induce infertility, I'm not sure there's anything can be particularly learned here for the purposes of exploitation, at least past that kicking them in the nuts isn't a viable option. Assessment of stomach and intestinal biomatter complete. Clear evidence of a meat-heavy diet, some bone and connective tissue material present. Also evidence of carbohydrates, some undigested grain husks. Interesting indeed. If the Sanghili have willingly taken on an omnivorous diet, that may be a possible vector for exploitation. I mean, it's much easier to create an invasive genetically modified crop than altering their livestock, for example, or trying to infect large populations of Sanghili with an aerosolized mutagen. Yeah, altering their crops to make them indigestible or even toxic to the species may be a plausible course of action. Well, should we be able to locate the food source? Compiling this information alongside the rest of this initial biological investigation, there's still much more we could still learn. Let's keep going.
Corpsman Grey, could you step outside, please? Your presence is requested.
I'm midway through this autopsy, unless
You
it's...
are to present your cursory findings to Commander Osman.
Very well, I'll be there immediately. I'll just get cleaned up.
Very good.
Recording terminated pending a debrief to Commander Saren Osman.
Thanks for watching. If I could respectfully ask, if you enjoyed this video, consider hitting the subscribe button and the little bell icon so you're told the second a new video hits the shelves. Hit this video with a like if you enjoyed, and if not, it's not a problem. And be sure to pop a comment below to throw me an idea on what you want to see next. Massive thanks to my awesome patrons, Spartan10148, the Metarch of my facility, Falcon, Prophet, Leon, Sophia, Mikhail, and Irrefutable, the monitors of the array, Darian, Flaming Halo, Cameron, Spartan0137, the Cave Potato, Andrew, Shia, Dakota, and Ghost, my diligent sub-monitors, my fleet of Strato Sentinels, and my loyal enforcers, and all other patrons who have supported the channel and helped keep the domain operational. Huge props and recognition to Todd Morrison, Spartan137, Wesley Stuckey, and Jacob Kemp for jumping on as Tier 0 Transcendent YouTube members. You guys are epic. Shout out to John for reasons. And if you want to help support the channel and score yourself tons of perks and merch, head over to Patreon or consider becoming a YouTube member. Links, as ever, are in the description. Much love, take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.